everyone. Welcome to the conversation series of the Center for Public Policy and Governance at Tezpur University. I am Dr. Yugank Goyal, and today we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Aseem Prakash, who is the Professor of Public Policy at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, the School of Government, Public Policy and Governance, and he is also the officiating Deputy Director of TIS Hyderabad campus. He's a political sociologist, has a vast experience in academia, more than 20 years actually. He's an institution builder. He set up the program in TIS. He earlier also set up the program in Jindal University, even abroad for that matter, in Maldives. He's also an advisor to many state governments, routinely consults the government on the implementation and design of public policy, and a scholar in his own right. He's also an extremely amiable person. Very, very inspiring faculty members, as the students tell me. Thank you so much, Aseem, for joining us. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, hi Yugan, good morning, and thank you. I'm also glad to be here. I hope that I'm able to say something which is useful for the students. Thank you so much.
No, indeed. In fact, I'm glad that you could take this time out. Today, we're going to discuss issues and ideas surrounding institutions and public policy. Institutions, largely from the framework of new institutional economics, but even beyond. So, Aseem, why don't we start with, maybe you can tell the audience, what are institutions and how should a public policy student or a scholar understand what is an institution?
Okay, let me start with an example. That
Great.
When you go on a road and you give right indicator, so the vehicle following that particular vehicle which is giving the indicator makes up the mind and adjusts the vehicle so they turn towards left, so that the vehicle can easily turn towards right. This is an example of institution. What I mean by these are the rules and the games, rules which an individual follows, and they are predictable in nature.
Right.
They tell you what to do and what not to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is an example. The very famous definition comes from the Nobel laureate Douglas North. Right. Institutions are humanly devised constraints that shape human interaction. Mm-hmm. It includes formal rules, informal rules, norms, conventions, human behavior which have been institutionalized over the period of times, which people expect. Mm-hmm. So we expect, in North India, you expect that when the son comes back or daughter comes back home after some time, you touch the feet. So that's an expected behavior, and that's an institution.
Right.
Similarly, if you violate a traffic law, there's a challan. That's a formal institution.
Right.
So it's basically norms, rules, conventions, what you can do and what you cannot do. Caste is an institution.
Written and unwritten, perhaps.
Yeah, both written and unwritten. Caste, there's no rules about caste. Somebody might have written a few centuries ago, but they're reproduced socially. Marriage and institutions.
Correct.
So these are various examples. Khap Panchayat is an institution. There is no constitution for Khap Panchayat.
Right. But Constitution of India is also an institution, right? Which is a
Correct.
formal institution. And then there are all these.
So as you know better than me, so there are formal institutions like Constitution of India, Government of India, Union Ministries, so on and so forth, United Nations, the World Health Organizations. But for the scholars, or in particular Douglas North, makes a distinction between institutions and organization. Let me give you an example. I work in a university called Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Mm-hmm. So UGC is an institution because it sets the rules. Tata Institute of Social Sciences is an organization because we are the players, we follow that rule.
I see, right, great.
But
it's an important distinction.
But at the same time, TIS becomes an institution and the students follow the rule, the students become the player. The student union becomes an organization. So the same body can be an institution as well organization depending on which level you are interacting.
I see. But essentially for someone who's listening to this audio, I think in economics, institutions are very easily understood as rules of the game, written or unwritten.
Correct.
What is the importance of studying institutions in public policy, Aseem? Particularly, these days it has become a very powerful discipline, definitely in economics, but it has gone beyond. Can you shed some light on the discipline itself or the idea itself as a sub-discipline, so to speak?
I think the study of institution is a great converging tool. Mm-hmm. It is a converging tool socially of intellectuals across belonging to different school of thoughts. Mm-hmm. Whether you are a Marxist economist, Marxist institutionalist, coming from a liberal school of following new classical economics, you're a new institutionalist, but there's a convergence that institutions matter.
Mm-hmm.
They may be having a different understanding how will institution matter, but there's absolutely no disagreement across school of thought on the importance of good institutions for the objectives which you want to pursue. There's absolutely no disagreement there.
Interesting. So this is one of those rare fields in social sciences where people otherwise disagreeing with each other can at least come and use probably similar tools to discuss, and maybe end up disagreeing. But and in terms of its location in economics, is there a particular reason why it's part of economics and not sociology? You yourself work a lot on institutions and are a political sociologist, so not being
See, actually, if you see that institutions have been always part of our intellectual pursuits, whether you belong to history, anthropology, sociology, even when our great people wrote great texts like Mahabharata or Ramayana, they're talking about institutions. But it was never used in the manner in which new institutional economics uses, or the bedrock is new classical economics. What they did, they always this. There have been whether you're a scholar documenting colonial history, or you're talking post-independent India, or you're documenting the earlier literature or Mughal India or whatever, ancient India, Buddha. There always been study of institutions. But what new classical economics did in very simple terms, on which new institutional economic was built, that they used institutions to understand why do countries differ in performances.
Why some countries rich, some people, some poor.
Yeah. Why does growth differ? Why are certain countries having apparently the similar kind of natural resource base are so different in their outcomes? Right. So what they pointed out, and it's very useful for anybody, is that they pointed out that formal institutions, these countries were able to move from informal institutions to formal institutions, and formal institutions, because of the predictability, their codification, they were able to reduce the transaction cost, and that becomes the critical fulcrum on which economics started developing. And the governments across the world in pursuits of better outcomes, better performances, better economic growth, all started adopting this understanding that how do we create institutions which can reduce transaction costs.
So this brings me to this important question, because is it true that only formal institutions reduce transaction costs? And in that sense, what I'm really wanting to ask you is, can the framework of new institutional economics be applied to countries like India, where a vast majority of our transactions and interactions take place through unwritten social norms, conventions, models of behavior which have been tacitly absorbed rather than written like formal laws? And so is there something, is the framework enough to capture these nuances? And the other thing is, transaction costs often get reduced even in informal setting, right? So I mean, let me have you answer this question, and through some examples maybe, and I can come back with more.
Okay, let me start with this issue of transaction cost. If I have to go from place A to place B, and if I take less time by taking a shared auto, obviously my if I go by bus, which also may charging the same money, I will obviously use an auto if it is available, permitted by the local state, the local rules which operate, the traffic rules which operate. And at the my transaction cost of reaching from point A and B is reduced because the government permitted the use of share taxis or share autos. So that's given, transaction cost is given. The issue comes up, I don't have any differences till now, but the issue comes up that transaction cost, the reduction of transaction cost is equated with efficiency, and efficiency is equated with cost benefit analysis. So in this particular trajectory, countries in global south, where, as you just said, informal institutions are pretty dominant, how the state functions, how the local state functions, who will I, there may be we know very well that we might be wanting to go by a particular taxi driver who may come and pick up at my home. No, so these are the informal norms. And why I take that particular auto? Because this person always comes and gives a salutation which I like. Or I may like the way his auto is decked up and what are the songs he plays. There can be any informal reasons. So I'm not looking for the reduction of transaction cost, but I'm trying to look for a social comfort which I have with that person. And if you extrapolate this into different places, different other issues, I want to get a death certificate. Of the process is I can go online, or if my district does not provide an online, I have to visit the center and pay a certain fees and come back after 2 hours to 3 days to collect the death certificate. That's a perfect example of formal institution. But instead what I might do that I will pick up my phone and call up some kith and kin sitting there, that why don't you get me the certificate when you come back home? So my transaction cost is reduced in this informal arrangement more than that formal arrangement. So the challenge for us, now why I gave this example, the challenge for us that in this theory of transaction cost given by new institutional economics, which is largely about the cost benefit, and economists measure it as Pareto optimality. If the challenge for us that how do we embed the questions of equity, social justice, and deepening of democracy? If institutions are able to do that, they will serve a purpose which is required for the global south. And there are umpteen numbers of paper evidences across the globe where we know that deepening of democracy has served better for the economic growth than any other regime. And for serving that purpose, institutions should promote and have to promote equity, social justice.
So Asim, here's a question. Equity and social justice are necessary determinant for any thriving and mature democracy. Western countries, where new institutional economics really is said to have originated, at least in a scholarly sense, talk about efficiency. Are you trying to say that new institutional economics does not factor equity and social justice in its theoretical framework? And because developing countries need it more, that is why we need to tweak new institutional economics when we apply it to our settings, and we don't need to because they don't need it.
No, not at all. Everybody's concerned about it. No government in the world can say that they are not bothered about equity and justice. Every government is selected because they work for equity and justice.
Exactly.
Elected. Yeah.
So the new institutional economics framework, does it allow for responding to questions of social justice and these things?
See, as a political sociologist, if I wear the hat of political sociologist for a minute, I would say that there are two ways to look at. One understanding is that reduction of transaction cost, more surplus, more investment, more economic growth, which in turn creates more gets reinvested and then again provides employment and leads to growth. That is one understanding, which new institutional economics by and large banks on, and which in some quarters it's called the famous trickle-down approach, but it's not a very pure form of trickle-down approach. It's not the 60s trickle-down approach, but by and large understanding remains the same. When I say that the equity, social justice, and the questions of democracy has to be embedded in institutions, then we are talking about that it's the equity and the framework, institutional framework promoting equity, providing equitable opportunity, providing market entitlements, providing equitable human opportunities which lead to growth rather than the other way around. And for that matter, we have to capture the processes of institutions which can do that. For an economist as well as a sociologist. So here the challenge is how can economists learn from the sociologist and how can sociologists learn from an economist? That is the challenge. So, and if you're able to capture the processes and say that my growth model is where it begins from the people. If I'm able to create human opportunities, which translates into growth rather than the other way around, growth creating human opportunities.
Now, this is interesting to know. So essentially what you're saying is that new institutional economics scholars often bank on reduction of transaction costs through formal mechanisms leading to growth, which will then impact and lead to distributive justice. But here, what we're talking about is that we want to use institutions themselves directly for promoting distributional justice or distributional consequences.
And if you use the outcome, like language economy, distributional outcomes.
Distributional outcomes. Correct. Now, do you think that's not happening? Let's say in a country like India, I mean, are institutions not engaging, or in other words, let me put it the question the other way around. Do you think Indian lawmaking exercises or Indian state or Indian policy making, is it adopting a model of new institutional economics without maybe naming so, the way it originated in the West? Or are they able to respond to social justice inequity concerns through institutions directly? Like, where is India in this? Where is India's public policy discourse located in this institutional economics, scholarly trajectory?
I don't think, and you also study institutions, you also know this, India cannot be clubbed into any pure model.
Of course.
And any pure model. So you give a theory, and 10 kilometers ahead on the road, that theory changes to some other thing. So there's no one single theory, there's no single model which can fit in institutional economics. So now, how do we understand? What we have to understand, that what is the ratio in which new institutional policies based on new institutional economics works? What is the ratio in which policies which are demand of the democracy, demand of the people, are able to articulate themselves in the policy domain? So in that, you will find the ratio may be higher towards many of the macro policies which talk about cost benefit, will talk about new institution, the transaction cost in the manner new institutional economics is talking about. But that does not mean that there are no other policies which don't talk about that. Because India is a very, very complex mix. And policies here are not by a model or intellectual model. Policies are decided in India by the political processes. You have a farm agitation in front of you. There is a particular model which wants market efficiency. The protesters don't want that, and there's a stalemate. So what I'm saying is, policies in India are decided by the political processes. But what we don't have is the theory to understand these political processes through which we can continuously create models of equity and social justice. So there is no big challenge to the transaction cost theory intellectually.
So this is interesting. In that sense, I would really like and urge you to advise or give ideas to the viewers, if they are scholars of institutional economics, if they're interested in this subject, at the same time wanting to locate themselves in understanding Indian contexts using the tool of institutional economics. How should they interpret this framework? How should they tweak it? What are the different directions that they need to take, which may be departures from the standard way in which this theory is understood, but still be far more useful for Indian context?
It's a very, very difficult question. There cannot be one answer to that, but I can just spring forth an idea, which for the sake of discussion, debate and all, right? Because the question itself is very complex, and I started by saying there's no one single model you can do that. But what I feel currently, that what we need to work both at the level of policy, both at the level of discourse, as well as intellectual discourse, as well through the popular press, is to how to create a theory of market entitlements. How do an individual get into the market and claim her or his due right? If the famous economist Joan Robinson, I can't paraphrase it, but said something like that the worst being is not being exploited by capitalists, something like that if you're not in the market, you're nowhere. And this is what my work on Dalit Capital shows, that Dalits are in the market. They're doing their own business. It's about the small business. But they are included at the adverse terms. So for them, they cannot work in, for instance, food industry. Because if Dalit owns a hotel, not many people might like to eat there because of our historical social norms. That's an institution. The upper caste traders might want them to give lesser number of days for return of credits. because they have a higher bargaining power. So there can be numerous such cases. But what I'm trying to say, they are in the market at adverse terms, which also economists in some terms, in terms of employment, call disguise employment. So everybody is in a market, but what for matters, if you are not in the market, you will not survive. That is what the economy is all about. But what a theory of institutions can create for this, that how do we create a subset of a theory of market-based entitlements, where as a worker, as a wage worker, I have a claim on the state and the society that my minimal rights are protected. And that process of this particular creation of entitlement and rights is able to embed, we are able to embed in the theory of institutions.
Do you want to tell our scholars and the viewers some starting points of some ideas that they can refer to, some books, maybe authors they can refer to start understanding institutional economics, and then some in order to also arrest the tendency of using the Western dominated, the Western theories of institutional economics and employing them in Indian context, maybe some limits to those ideas?
I think anybody who wants to start studying institutions should start with Douglas North, the famous book, Institutional Performance, something like that. I don't remember the full name. Very lucidly written, 8-10 chapters.
It's called Institutions, Institutional Change and Economic Performance.
Yeah. So it's a very lucidly written, it's a summary of his 30-40 years of work, which he has done in very high graded economic journal, but has written this book for layperson like us. So one should start with that. That is a very dominant understanding of new institutional economics, understanding of institutions. But what it does, it gives you a tremendous amount of clarity, because you need to know the person whom you're trying to engage. You need to first understand the thought with whom you're trying to engage. Right. And whenever you read this, just think about your surroundings. When you go to PDS, when you go to the police station, when you go to buy half a kg of rice in an informal provision store, whether those norms operates there or not, what Douglas North is saying. And if you start thinking on those lines, you may have a fresh idea. You may immediately get an idea that many of these things may not work. Then you have to look for what will work. So I will study Pranab Bardhan. He's a Marxist institutionalist. Right. He will have a certain idea of why institutions function and don't function. And again, I will say that have both the understanding and then again observe things around you, whether they work or they don't work. Your work is on informal sectors in Agra, in Delhi, and so on and so forth. And you have done this work. You know this very well. So you see whether those norms which we take from Marxist institutionalist or new classical economist or new institutionalist, Elinor Ostrom works so much massive work on environment and institutions and community-led preservations. So what continuously ask the question, okay, this is the model, and whether this is working or not when I see the situation around me, and you yourself will get the idea.
Correct. So here's another question. Maybe I can just sort of try to wrap it up. But you said something during the interview about transaction cost. So let me ask you a pinpointed question. Do you think the theory of transaction cost, the way it is proposed in new institutional economics, has its own flaws? It looked like to me that this is what you're trying to propose, that let us not put transaction cost, reduction of transaction cost as a goal on the pedestal. Is there something that you want to talk about it, the way we have understood? Does it need some revision? Because it has dominated economic studies, particularly law and economics, for the last 60 years now, after Ronald Coase's famous article. Do you think it needs a revision now, particularly in India?
I would say, it's a very, very tough question, because these things are written by people who are the biggest names in the field. And as we often discuss that, I think institutions is one sub-discipline where there are maximum number of Nobel laureates. These are difficult questions, and it's difficult to contest these giants. But what I'm just proposing, that even when you talk about transaction cost, examine that transaction cost from the society at large and democracy at large. Whether those transactions cost are, when you reduce the transaction cost, is that transaction cost deepening equity, deepening democratic participation, furthering the cause of social justice? And there you have the answer. if the transaction cost is not able to do that, then you need a different understanding of transaction cost. Now, so there can be a difference between a positive transaction cost and a negative transaction cost. Now, so these are the questions which you need to see around you, engage yourself, and that's the best way for any student. We are also a student of institutions, and that's what we do. That just pick up an author, read them carefully, understand what they are saying, and then see whether it operates in things around you when you go for buying milk, when you're going for buying bread, or when you take a share auto, when you invite the Swiggy guy for food. See, let me give an example here. That Swiggy is the best example of Swiggy and Zomato and Ola Ubers of new classical economics, where there's a complete information. Is the best example for that. Now, so that does mean that there is a role for information. There's an information asymmetry in the market, and certain technological apparatus has plugged that gap. So that's why I'm saying that I'm not in favor of rejecting whatever these are saying. What I'm urging all of us to engage with it in our own social realities, in our own circumstances, and see what we can contribute to it.
Asim, perhaps it looks like to me that what you're proposing is that public policy scholars and practitioners should engage with the discipline. And it's quite an exciting field. I think the future of the field seems to be bright, in my view. And I think you may agree with that. But as a final question, we know you've written a lot and you've engaged a lot in your own work.
Let me first engage with that for 2 minutes. I'll take 1 or 2 minutes. Just let me engage with that. To my mind, public policy is the most exciting discipline available to anyone right now. Whether you're from medics or you're a sociologist, you are a lawyer, everybody is a policy professional. It does that. It makes you to study those issues which you discuss in every systematically. That is this is what public policy does. And if you have to do public policy, you cannot do anything without studying institutions. Public policy is an organized initiative to usher in changes or to.
So this is great. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what would you tell the young emerging scholars and students and even practitioners about the future of public policy, institutional economics, and public policy, understanding this discipline in the coming time?
I will first clarify 1 or 2 points. As a policy student, I study institutions. I don't start with, for me, institutions are not necessarily new institutional economics. So we have to bring that, I study institution. I don't mean to say I will study only new institutional economics. That's the first thing which all policy scholars should be aware of. Second thing is that, when it comes to public policy discipline, it is the most exciting discipline right now available to in the current academic spectrum of the country. Why I say this? This is that we, in one sense, every Indian citizen is a policy maker, is a policy professional, is a policy student. We talk policy day and night. Everybody has a view on how the farmers' problem can be resolved, what can be done to ICDS. There's nobody who will not have a problem. And they can give you the critique from the critique of Niti Aayog chairperson to the prime minister, to the minister, to the scholar. Everybody has the critique. So everybody is a policy professional. What policy does is that tries to make you learn how to study these issues in a very systematic manner. And when I say systematic, that means public policy cannot be studied without studying institutions. We cannot engage with public policy without studying institutions. And that is where you have to start engaging with that these are the 3, 4, 5 models available on study of institutions. Whether do those institutions matter to us, those understanding of those institutions. When I order my food, when I go for submitting my electricity bill, or when my water connection has broken, water is not getting not coming at my home. Whether those, or whether when I think of slums, when I think of informal settlements, how do people survive? How do migrants stay in the big cities? What is happening to our water bodies in the cities? What are the encroachment problems? Why in a city like Hyderabad, which had 1,200 lakes at some point of time in 1950s, 60s, have been reduced to only 180 lakes in 2020. So when you study these institutions, you will get information, and then you see whether those understanding of institutions are able to address your issues or not. And that's why I urge all of us to please concentrate on study of institutions if you want to be a policy professional.
Well, thank you so much. Any parting thoughts on small town capitalism? I know you've been working on this subject for a while now, and I think there is some merit in understanding capitalism the way it is unfolding in India in small towns compared to how it happened in the big ones, or it's happening in the big ones.
Karl Polanyi once said that modern capitalism is all about shifting from patronage to contract, from customs to contract. And small towns in many places, not all over India, still work on customs. And the future of India is in these small towns. What contract means is a modern understanding of market relationship, where my job opportunities are not contingent of which gender, religion, or caste I belong to, or which family I come from, where I want to work for the market with dignity, earn my entitlements. And that's where, if India has to grow, small towns have to grow. If small towns have to grow, they have to shift from custom to contract. And that is all about small town capitalism.
Thank you so much. This is great, and it was great having this conversation with you, Aseem. It's my pleasure indeed, as always. And I think our viewers have also enjoyed this. We would love to hear more comments from you, and please stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more such conversation series with more such scholars and practitioners in public policy. Thank you so much for now.
Thank you so much, Yugan, for inviting me. I really enjoyed myself. I hope I'm able to inspire some students through this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.